Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, A24 presents The Farewell Comes at Night. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Adam Thomas, and I am not going to say anything funny because I don't think either of these movies are very funny.
And I'm Thomas Mariani, and everything seems totally natural. And then, there's black gunk coming out of my mouth. Oh, no. A dream sequence. Oh, I hope that doesn't happen another 5 or 6 times. Is the only thing about my character. Whew. Oh boy.
Well, you got to stop with that chewing tobacco.
I know, I'm such a big tobacco chewer over here. That's what I delete out of every episode, everybody. Me spitting up chaw.
And it's a lot, too.
These recordings are 2 hours, and a half hour it's just me chewing chaw.
Spitting out your wintergreen skull.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. But welcome, everybody, to the Double-Edged Double Bill, where every week, if you're new, Adam and I, at the end of a previous episode, pick a good and a bad movie to cover for the next episode. So we did that with our 2 picks for this evening, which the topic is A24, because Alex Garland's new movie, Men, is coming out, which we're recording this when the initial reviews have come out. And the most interesting things I've heard is that it's Alex Garland's mother.
Oh, boy.
Basically, like the Darren Aronofsky movie. So I'm very curious to see exactly what that ends up being. But, Adam, this is interesting because this is us repeating a topic, because we have covered A24 previously, for the show at least. Like, we've done, some of the other movies we've done have been like Moonlight, The Florida Project, Ex Machina, and then A Ghost Story and Swiss Army Man were the 2 movies we covered in our previous A24 episode, though unfortunately that's one of the few you were not able to be on. We had our guest Ryan Quarterman talk with me about those 2 movies. So Adam, I'm going to give you the floor. Talk about A24. What do you like about this little indie studio so much?
They just give, these up-and-coming or sort of really kind of strange off-the-grid filmmakers a chance to put something out there that they'll, get in the theater for the most part. I love that they sort of go across all genre. They have a lot really good, horror films, good sci-fi films, good romance, good comedy, good everything. There's no specific formula really to them. I mean, maybe that's not true. I guess when if it's an A24 movie for the most part, not just because of the logo in the beginning.
There's a very clear kind of brand that they have with either the movies they make or the movies they distribute, that they acquire.
Yeah,
they have a certain aesthetic that's familiar.
But they're all over the map as far as what genre it is and what type of story is being told. And I just really love that they're one of the few studios that are out there still that are just putting out different type of content all the time. It's not just horror, or it's not just action, or it's everything. Like, it's an all-encompassing thing. And they give, like we said, look at the chances they take. Uncut gems. Who would have ever thought that would work?
You would never suspect those 5 movies I mentioned we've covered on the show were made by the same studio.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Right. But yeah, I agree, and I think what's so interesting is that they've been able to keep up sort of like a brand, while at the same time giving their directors and writers creative freedom, allowing them to do what they want with their movies and putting them out. I think the interesting thing is when they have sort of that aesthetic and they market it, it's often kind of had some interesting. I think that's very crucial to one of the movies we're talking about today, in terms of it was a movie that made a decent amount of money because of how A24 decided to market it, though a lot of people were left a bit more dissatisfied by it. So we'll talk about that in a bit with that movie. But at the same time, with it's like you mentioned, they're a weird studio that is just willing to make daring choices to distribute some of these movies. Like, A Ghost Story is one of those movies I can still remember where I loved it so much, but when I saw it in the theater, it wasn't a huge crowd, and there's a certain point in that movie where that very small crowd, most of which left, except for me and the 2 friends I saw that movie with, basically. So they can be divisive to a certain degree, but I think that makes them far more interesting. And if nothing else, has also allowed other studios to kind of try and piggyback on that while doing their own thing, like Neon is a great example of that, or Anna Karenina, some of these other studios that kind of have a similar low budget distribution thing. But A24 is just the one that does it with the most interesting and more consistent than not quality. There's only a handful of, I would argue, very bad A24 films.
Yeah, I'd say that that's very true. I'm sort of hard pressed. I mean, there is definitely a couple. It might be some misses, but it's very rare that it's just a really lousy movie.
Yes. As we'll detail this evening, where we had our picks that we did at the end of our last episode, and we ended up with, between my two bad picks, and got It Comes at Night, and then your two good picks, and we ended up with The Farewell. Once again, two movies that have a similar sort of like fit into the A24 vibe, as it were, as the kids say, but are also two incredibly different movies.
What? I thought The Farewell was a sequel.
I can't believe they brought the dog back. That was like the big end game, like when it came through the portal, and it was just like, wow, the dog came back. Well,
oh yeah.
Let's just get into that movie then. Let's get into It Comes at Night.
I think that Will and I should be the only ones who go outside for a while. We don't know what made Stanley sick. We don't know anything. If you're lying to me, I will kill you.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
So It Comes at Night came out June 9th, 2017 from writer-director Trey Edward Schultz. And when I was referencing earlier sort of like the marketing that A24 puts into their movies, this is, I think, the crown jewel example of what they do a lot with their horror films, because this is more on the horror side of things. I can distinctly remember when that trailer came out, marketed as more of like a traditional horror, like spooky post-apocalyptic movie. I remember a lot of people were very interested, and they went and saw that movie, and they came out with largely divisive responses, particularly very like harsh responses from audience members. Like I remember I saw this back when I was still working at a theater, and I saw it with a lot of my fellow employees at like an employee screening we did. And of like that group of like 10 to 15 people, I would say 10 of them loathed it. And I was one of the ones that was kind of in the middle about it, had mixed feelings. And one of the other more cinema prone guys really loved it. And that guy was lambasted by that larger majority of people. So it provoked a lot of harsh responses. But Adam, I think it'll be interesting because you don't even have that kind of mixed reception I initially had about this movie. I think you said at the end of our last episode you're a pretty big fan of It Comes at Night.
Yeah, initially I was. I mean, I'm still a fan. I don't think I'm as big of a fan as I was when I first saw it. On the rewatch, there was definitely some things that I was kind of like, okay. The main one being the sort of dream sequences that you were referencing. It gets pretty old pretty quick. But other than that, I really do kind of enjoy this movie. I think there's this constant sense of dread and tension. I kind of love Joel Edgerton and almost anything he does, and this is no exception. I think he's fucking wonderful in this movie. I think, and you'll have to forgive me, but the other main male lead that he's playing off of from Possessor and things like that,
Christopher Abbott, yeah.
Christopher Abbott, I think is wonderful in this movie. I think pretty much across the board, the acting's great. I love the world it sets up, but yet doesn't give you too much. You're sort of able to, if you want to go that route, fill in the blanks yourself. Like you don't really know what happened. You know it's a disease, obviously, but you don't know how bad it is everywhere. If it's just in this one state that they're in, you have no idea. And like I said, I love the underlying sense of dread this whole movie has. I think it's a pretty well crafted paranoia film.
Yeah, brief, if you maybe don't remember this movie when it came out, just a synopsis here. It basically follows two families in the middle of, like you mentioned, there's a vague sort of post-apocalyptic thing that's referenced but never quite is explained about that basically puts everybody in a weird possessive state about being infected with a virus, which, 2017 to now, that has a bit of a different connotation. But the two families, you have Paul, who's played by Joel Edgerton, and Sarah, played by Carmen Ejojo, and their son Travis, played by Kelvin Harrison, who are a family unit that at the beginning of the movie has to kill the grandfather that was with them initially. And then shortly after that, they have an encounter with the Will character, played by Christopher Abbott, who is trying to get supplies for his family. And then Paul leaves with him to check out like his family, see how things are doing over there, and then comes back with Will's wife, played by Riley Keough, and their son Andrew, played by Griffin Robert Faulkner. And it's about basically these two family units initially trying to get along together with each other, but then, you mentioned some of the paranoia comes into effect, and the things start falling apart from there. And like I said, when I saw this initially, I wasn't a huge fan of it. I had mixed feelings, but I was like, oh no, it looks kind of nice, and the acting's pretty solid, but I don't know if it really comes together that well. And so I was curious to revisit it, maybe see if I found something new to appreciate about the movie. I think a rewatch really hurt the movie for me as well, but to the degree where I would easily say this is one of the worst A24 movies. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I like stories usually, especially with these A24 stories, they don't always have to go full-on horror with the horror that's supposed to be there. That's what I even love about, some stuff like The Witch, for example. That's a movie where they tease a lot of, stuff about The Witch, and that was a movie that also pissed off and divided audiences. But you were still invested enough in, the family unit, and those characters felt pretty fleshed out, and all this other stuff that you were invested to keep going. The trouble is, despite the best efforts of all these actors who are very talented, I think all of these people are so thin as, sort of archetypes for a post-apocalyptic movie that I don't really have that much investment when we don't see much of any horror here. I think that's fine if you can invest me in the characters in the middle of the situation. The trouble is, I don't think there is really much of a world being built here. I don't think there's much of an interesting, dynamic being established that we haven't seen in so many other of these post-apocalyptic movies before. The only difference is really that Trey Edward Schultz kind of has his, free-flowing camera that's impressive for, the lower budget that it is, $5 million budget, that he's able to, sort of walk around with that steady cam. But that's a trick he also pulls so often. It's just let me just get in the actors' faces for, a big one-shot, where I, go from one person to the other, I'm a pendulum going back and forth. And I just got so incredibly tired of the few tricks this movie had that, especially knowing where it was going with the second watch, made it kind of interminable at even 92 minutes. I think this is kind of like everything where when most people who don't like A24 horror talk about it, the elevated horror, quote unquote, the term that kind of got slapped with these movies by a lot of naysayers. This is one of those movies where I totally get where they're coming from, because this feels like the absolute kind of nadir of A24 horror to me.
Well, that sound like pretty good final thoughts. So, no, I completely understand where you're coming from, and I don't think you're really wrong on any level. I don't know. It's really hard for me to even pinpoint what it is about this movie that I think is so positive. Like I said, I really like the cinematography. I like the very minimal score that's involved. I really do enjoy the Joel Edgerton character and his relationship with his wife, more so than the relationship with the son. I care more about his relationship with his wife, and especially her in general, I think is really dynamite. It just sort of the pain she shows after the father, they have to put the father down in a very horrible, horrific way. And then how she's dealing with her son, and how she deals with Paul, and the way he's just kind of blunt about things. And I love the end with her, and where she's at the top of the stairs with the rifle. I think it's a great scene. I do also wish that it would have leaned more into either the horror genre or more into a character study piece. I feel it's on the cusp of both of those. I think you get enough, but I could also use more. And I think if they would have leaned more into one or the other, you personally, and a lot of people would have a completely different opinion of the film. I mean, obviously, because it'd be a different film.
Yeah, it'd be a good one.
Well, yeah, I think the potential's there. I guess I like it for its potential, if that makes sense.
I'm just curious because I get with like maybe at least Joel Edgerton, because I think I like him a lot as a performer as well.
He's
And I
great.
like Carmen Jojo in a lot of other things, but I just thought after everything with her father dying at the beginning, I agree. I think that's some of the most interesting stuff with her character. I think she gets really lost in the movie after that because we focus so much more on like the son character and his relationship with Joel Edgerton. Like you mentioned, that's the weaker relationship. That's also like the central one of this movie after a certain point. His whole fucking character is just these dream sequences. Like that's it. Like he has like a bit of a crush on like the Riley Keough character, but mostly it's just like him waking up from like, oh my god, I had a horrible dream about like me having sex with Riley Keough and she's spitting up black bile. Oh, I had another dream where I had like all this like pustules on my hand. He just fucking keeps waking up with the same thing. It's just like all of the most like interesting horror imagery is just those dream sequences, and it feels just like dream sequences can, I think, either be an interesting thing to implement once and then really develop things about the character, or to maybe be a recurring thread that actually develops stuff that we've also seen in the waking world, versus there's nothing to that son character, despite how much he becomes so crucial to the story, to the point where I think that Carmen Jojo, between that opening you're talking about with the grandfather and the ending where she has like the gun, she's barely in the fucking movie after that point. She's just kind of there as a presence, but the movie doesn't really focus on her that much at all.
I guess. I just feel that she gives a quite such a strong performance in comparison to, particularly the actor who plays the son. I do not like in this movie, and it's probably because of the whole dream sequencing and him being very one note as a character. But I just think that the performance you do get out of here is so strong that it sort of outshines a lot of the other performances. Joel Edgerton is this is the type of role he's to me excels at. This very sort of quiet, not super dialogue heavy, could be, antagonist, could be the protagonist. You have no idea where he's coming from, and I think he really excels at that role. And I think in this one, it's no exception. I think he falls in gray, like in this sort of spectrum. He's very gray. It's not black and white with this character in this movie. I mean, what happens at the end with particularly Riley Keough and the son is horrible. It is horrible. I almost wish, to be honest, that the movie sort of ended with that, with him seeing the effects of what he just did to this other family and sort of, him crying and things like that. And then it kind of ending. That's the other thing about this movie. Even at 90 whatever minutes, it should have probably ended 3 minutes earlier than it does, 3 to 5 minutes earlier than it does. We know, I think, as an audience, that ultimately the son's infected and it's going to happen. Obviously, with the 9,000 dream sequences, I don't feel that it needed to show it at the end, though. We got it. You get it. You get what's going to happen. Everyone's going to die. There's a thing about bleakness in movies. I do like bleak movies and things like that, like movies like The Road, or which is a much better example of a movie like this. But there are also movies where the bleakness feels artificial and manufactured as just a tool to push the story, push the movie. And I don't get that feeling with this one. Like I said, I just feel like they should have leaned into it more. And I think you'd have had something really, really bleak and dark and sort of depressing. Because there are notes of that, like I said, the Riley Keough stuff, the sort of ultimately what happens with the other family trying to get out of the house, and the stuff with the grandpa, the stuff with the dog. There's a lot there that is dark and sad and depressing. It sounds like I'm changing my mind about the movie, and maybe I am. It's just, I wish they'd have leaned into even that, just the bleakness of it all.
There's a lot of the I wish as opposed to what is.
Yeah, there is.
I want to address something like with that bleakness that you were talking about, because that's that sort of like, oh, it's an artificial bleakness, is exactly how I feel about this movie. Like, we mentioned the dog thing earlier. The dog is really introduced as like, oh, he's the only companion to Kelvin. And in theory, you would like to see like that relationship build up between him and the dog. Really isn't. He like pets him a couple of times, and like that's about it. And the dog is kind of like sort of a watchdog after that. And then they have to kill that dog. And it's like, I don't mind if you kill a dog in a movie. I'm not one of those people, even though I'm a dog person, where it's like, if you kill a dog, I'm just like, you're a fucking monster piece of shit. How fucking dare you? This movie's terrible. Not necessarily.
I've never understood that logic, personally.
I mean, I guess some people are like very like compassionate to dogs to a degree where it's just like, you can't even kill them in a movie. But I think it's a really cheap device to use. And I think this movie does it so incredibly cheaply, where it's just like, oh, he's sick. And we don't have much of that, like the emotional connection you want to get out of Calvin Harrison hearing that dog being killed should in theory be like devastating. But to me, it's just like, this is just some like artificial bullshit. Even the thing with the son, the other son, the Andrew character, there's like so little to that whole fucking group with like Christopher Abbott and Riley Keough and that son. Like the most character you get out of them is the bit where like he's playing with like the Stegosaurus. That's like the one bit of character that's like kind of like a cute moment, but that's not enough to make me like feel like, oh, you killed that kid, but in a way that felt earned. Not at fucking all. That was so incredibly cheap.
No, I mean, I don't think I can agree with that. Because I still definitely felt like, oh fuck, when it happened. I don't know if it was Riley Keough's reaction. I don't know if it's just the idea of it, like him taking a shot, and clearly he shot the kid instead of her, because I think he was trying to shoot her, not the kid at first. It's just. Just her reaction afterwards, kill me, blah blah blah. I found it to be very disturbing and sort of like a gut punch. Because I'm definitely on the flip side. I'm one of those where when you kill kids in movies, like it doesn't bother me. Like I think it can also be a very sort of useful tool, more so than killing an animal, at least in my opinion. So it definitely got me. I mean, I will be honest, it did get me.
Because, like, with the whole killing the kid thing, it feels so much more, like, in theory, like, when that works, it's like, oh my god, because you've gotten to be, like, really invested in, like, this family dynamic, and then when that happens, it's, like, supposed to crush you. And I agree that I think Riley Keough is doing her best. I think all these actors are doing their best with this kind of characters, but I don't personally think, like, this affects me about as hard as, say, like, a fucking Walking Dead episode, quite frankly. Like, this feels like it's an artsy attempt at, like, a Walking Dead episode. Where, like, they'll do stuff like that, like, kill a kid, or kill a dog, or, like, have, like, this horrible, like, big thing happen. And it's like, I feel sorry for these actors, most of which are, like, very good, just being stuck with, like, the most baseline material that's very repetitive of just, like, oh my god, the paranoia that's supposed to build up, but, like, oh, who can we trust? Who are we supposed to trust? Do I trust this guy with these, like, things that I know about him, but are they really trying to play tricks on me? The problem is that these are all such specific, like, tropes that rely so crucially on us understanding who the characters are initially, and then having that doubt rise up because, wait, that doesn't feel right for that particular person. The trouble is, none of these people have fucking actual character, beyond very basic traits, like even, like, Joel Edgerton is like, oh, I'm the overprotective dad of this particular group. Oh, cool, do you have any other interiority to your character? Nope. Not really. Don't have fucking anything, basically. And I feel that's pretty much the same with, like, most of these characters. I feel sorry for all these actors being saddled with so little, but ultimately it just feels like we're going into the tropes of a, like, survivalist horror movie without any of the actual, like, filler that makes it interesting. It's an outline of one of those movies more than it is, like, an actual fucking movie.
The thing is, and this is one of the reasons why I love doing this show and also why I hate you. Yeah, you are swaying me a little bit on it. Like, don't get me wrong, I still don't think I dislike it as vehemently as you do. Like, I would not say this is A24's worst movie by any means. But yeah, I think you might be right to where it's got sort of the bare bones outline of a good survivalist horror movie, and it's almost there. It doesn't capitalize on it, and that is a shame, because it is filled with, really strong actors and really good locations and things like that. But now that I sat here and talked to you, and again, I really hate this, that, of all people, Thomas Moriarty changed my mind about a movie. But yeah, I think you're right. Like I said, I think I liked this movie and still do like this movie enough for the potential of what's there, what the potential could be. But yeah, ultimately it does fall flat, I guess.
And I think this is just a big issue with, like, Trey Edward Schultz, who is somebody who I'd only seen this movie prior of his. He's only done 3 movies. So I did watch his other 2 movies, which the first one he did before this was a movie called Krisha, and then the more recent movie he did was Waves, which I'll talk more about Waves in a bit, put a pin in that. But I think with those 3 movies, he feels kind of like one of these people who kind of understands the A24 formula and then just kind of plays to it, as opposed to doing something interesting that A24 gravitates towards. It feels like he's almost like capitalizing on it to a degree that's like smart as like a filmmaker on like a business level, but he's like so lacking in any kind of actual detail to flesh things out. Like, this is him talking about, like, when he was talking about this movie, he said his simplest explanation for the title, It Comes at Night, is that the title came to him early on in the writing process before characters or plot were fully developed, and it stuck with him. He has also said it is supposed to represent a need to rest, but at night, fear and anxiety can take over. That's a fucking non-answer to anything about what this fucking title means.
I gotta agree with you there, because even when I was a little bit more positive on the movie, I was always like, what the fuck does It Comes at Night even mean? Like, my interpretation was, I guess it's nightmares, because there's a lot of those in this movie.
You're just in there like, where the fuck's Pennywise? When's he coming up here? It comes at night.
Well, the marketing for this movie was, you touched on it before, and I still think it is really good. Marketing is just, it's marketing for a movie that it's not, unfortunately. The poster art for this movie is fucking perfect, especially for some kind of horror movie, with the back of the dog, staring off into the darkness, barking. And just the title, It Comes at Night, in this dark forest area. Fucking perfect. How cool. That's sort of, I guess, yeah. There is missed potential here, because the thing is, even in the marketing, even in the trailer, even in this, and with the title, It Comes at Night, you expect there to be something out there, be it creatures or cannibalistic tribe or, whatever it is.
Well, Adam, what if I present to you this very original, daring thought that I'm sure Trey Edward Schultz is trying to display with this movie? What if the it that comes at night is man?
I mean, that's what I was kind of getting at with the cannibals and stuff, you fucking prick.
No, but it's each other. It's us, Adam. It's just like two family groups that like come toward each other, and then they realize that they are the true monsters.
Then I would call you pretentious. That's what I would call you.
Well, the twist is I am Trey Edward Schultz. Oh, that's the big thing.
Jesus Christ. I never realized. I've seen you face to face.
I have a very elaborate fat suit. I'm like Eddie Murphy.
You got weird doubles like fucking Udi was saying.
I hired Rick Baker to make my suits.
Yeah.
He's not doing anything, so I just got him to do
100%.
it. All my A24 money I make. But yeah, I think that's the thing. Is like, it's so a movie that is playing on that kind of tired thing, which there are plenty of movies that talk about that specific theme of like, oh, are men the true monsters, but like elaborate on it and have like interesting like other tentacles to that metaphor that's spread out and are like presented interesting in a visual way or interesting in some other aspect. But this movie is so like uncreative that I think there's a scene that's like so pivotal to the story where Kelvin Harrison is walking down after taking the one kid to bed, and then he's walking around down the hallway and he sees the big red door that's supposed to be locked at all times is unlocked, and then there's one of the worst non-jump scares I've ever seen in a movie, where he's just staring at the door for a second, and then a noise happens from the score, and he's like, oh my god. Yeah. There's nothing. It is a nothing burger of a scare.
Okay, let me just ask you.
Yes.
Flat out.
Right.
So do you like this movie?
Adam, I've been very subtle with my thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, you are dancing around it. Like, just spit it the fuck out, man.
I know, I'm too subtle this time about this. I'm like Trey Edward Schultz. I'm really keeping things close to the chest. Yeah, this movie's fucking terrible. I think, like, I didn't hate this initially, but then rewatching it, it just feels like it's kind of, like I said, everything that people criticize A24 horror movies for being. And I think it's such a shame that, like, this is sort of, like, the example of, like, what not to do. And it was, like, such a big example for a lot of people that I think it might have colored, like, A24, that quote-unquote elevated horror thing for a lot of folks, where it's just like, oh, this is so much of, like I mentioned, it's like a Walking Dead episode. It's one of these post-apocalyptic movies or shows that is just trying to put the sheen of like, oh no, but we're like an indie artsy movie and we're doing things different. Why? Because we have a better camera than somebody who's doing like a straight to streaming thing for like Shudder, and that makes us fucking great. And that's the thing, it's like all of like the camera moves that Trey Edward Schultz has, all this other stuff, it's just a disguise. Like it's an Emperor Has No Clothes situation where they're trying to come out and it's just like, oh, this is me in my elaborate costume. It's like, no, you're naked. You're not fooling me with this bullshit. There's nothing here. It's not maybe the worst A24 horror movie, because like you mentioned, like some of the performances are decent, and I think these actors try and do the best with what they can. But ultimately, yeah, this is just like, it's a nothing burger of a movie. There's just nothing there. You want to bite into a big, juicy burger, but you get like 2 buns. Like, there's nothing in the middle. No condiments, no burger, no lettuce, no tomato. It's just buns.
So those sound like pretty good final thoughts.
Those are actual final thoughts, yes.
Yeah,
so, Adam, if you have any final thoughts yourself.
There's a wealth of potential here. There is a lot of pretty solid performances, great actors. It's not a story that's never been told before. Like I said, The Road and The Rover, which another A24 movie, which is super solid. It's a lot of fluff in the marketing with no money shot in the payoff. It's just not the worst thing they've done, but it is definitely one that will not stand the test of time, especially in the pantheon of A24 horror films.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to emphasize that all my issues are really with the movie and not just the marketing. Like, the marketing
I
is
got
just a
that.
problem
Yeah, I got that.
that affected people elsewhere coming out of the movie. But, like, you shouldn't judge a movie by its trailer. You should judge it by the content of the actual film.
I agree. No, I definitely agree. But, you also got to speak on if a movie is marketed in one way that is completely different to what the content of the film is, then chances are that was a calculated decision to put butts in the seats.
Right, which A24 is also a business at the same time. It's a studio that makes these interesting movies, so they have to, I guess, do that to some extent. But whereas, like, with A Witch, trailer was much more, like, sort of shielding some of the more character-based nuanced stuff.
I think we're going to talk about that one in a little bit, so
Right.
put a pin in it.
We'll put a pin in it. But yeah, there have been other times where A24 does that, a bit of a bait and switch, but the movie's still good. Not so much with It Comes at Night, though. At least for moi. And maybe a bit for Adam after this discussion.
Yeah, now. I'm retired. This is my last episode.
Oh, well, let's see if any of that potentially can be turned around by our good feature, The Farewell.
What's wrong, Dad? Please tell me.
Your nan is dying.
She doesn't know, so you can't say anything. The family thinks it's better not to tell her.
Why is that better?
Chinese people have saying, when people get cancer, they die. We have to go to China.
Wedding is an excuse so everyone can see her.
He's my only cousin. Do you think I should be there?
You can't hide your emotions.
Really 呀？咋啦？咋不说话呢？
Shouldn't we tell her? Isn't it wrong to lie?
It's a good lie. Most families in China would choose not to tell her.
She's dying. Can you be a little more sensitive?
What do you want from me? To scream and cry like you?
Ah! 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 Ah!
好多了，好多了，好多了，再来点气儿，再来点气儿。
So The Farewell came out July 12th, 2019, from writer-director Lulu Wang, who, this is her second feature. I haven't seen her first film necessarily, but interesting little factoid, she is also in a relationship with Barry Jenkins, director of Moonlight, Adam. What a power couple.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Dude, I could not go to dinner with those two. I would be bawling constantly.
But you'd be really charmed, and then as the conversation went along, it would be really beautiful, and you'd just be like, oh.
Ultimately, you'd feel really good about myself at the end of it, but still cry the whole time to get there.
So this was your good choice, Adam, that we ended up picking. I had seen this before, and I remember it was pretty, like, buzzy when it came out in that summer. Interestingly, when this came out, it actually beat Avengers Endgame's record for the best per-screen average in terms of, like, box office gross, which is pretty interesting. And
what?
It was, like, in terms of, like, basically, like, per screen average is just how much money it makes per individual screen.
Oh, I got you. Right.
Not. It didn't outgross. It didn't make over $1 billion.
I was gonna say, where the fuck was I?
It would be great if, like, The Farewell, Avengers Endgame, Avatar, the 3 highest grossing movies of all time. That'd be amazing. But not the case. But Adam, you had not seen this before despite picking it. So, what did you think of The Farewell? Maybe give people a bit of a plot synopsis in case they weren't aware.
Okay, basic plot synopsis is we follow a young woman who's of Chinese heritage. She's lived in America since she was like 6, I believe is what they say. You know, her father and her mother all migrated to America. Her father's a translator, blah, blah. All of her family is still back in China. And she has a very close relationship with her grandmother. They talk daily and all that. And she finds out that her grandmother is dying of stage 4 lung cancer. Doctors only given her a couple months. Well, as is something, and I honestly didn't even know this was really a thing, but apparently in the East, a lot of families won't tell sort of the patriarchs or matriarchs or other family members that they are dying.
Oh, and which was the case actually with Lulu Wang. Like this is
which is based on a true story, right?
Yes.
Based on her and her grandmother, and it's because they think that the fear of death makes it a harder death to die, and so they all go to see her, but they use the sort of cover story that it's the only other grandchild's wedding. That way they can all get together and spend time with her as a family before they go. And it's sort of the journey of the main character played by Awkwafina as she struggles with how do we tell her, do we not tell her, and sort of struggles with her as identity as being Chinese and also American, and sort of the cultural differences there, and just growing up without any of her family other than her mother and father, and all that. Really, my initial thoughts were I loved it. I think it's fucking beautiful in almost every way. I always thought Awkwafina was a pretty good actress, but Jesus Christ, it's like a phenom performance in this. I mean, it's legitimately a star-making turn, and as good as she is, everybody around her is good. I mean, there's so many recognizable character actors in this. Like the actor who plays her father, you've seen 1,000 times.
Yeah, Zima, who like was in the Lady Killers and some other things.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to pronounce any of the names just because I have such a hard time with that. But the elderly woman who plays the grandmother, you fall in love with her almost instantly. I mean, pretty much right away. Like her very first couple lines, I was like, oh, I love this lady. She's talking to Awkwafina. She's like, be careful in New York. I read that people will steal your earrings right out of your ears. And they'll leave you with scars. And, she's like, I'm not wearing earrings, Grandma. Okay. Are you cold? Are you wearing a hat? Yes, I'm wearing a hat. It's
just not wearing a hat at all.
She's not wearing a hat at all. She's just shining her grandma. She's doing something like all people do, with your grandparents or even your parents if you don't live with them anymore. Are you taking care of yourself? Yes, I'm taking care of myself, even though you're fucking sitting there eating a double cheeseburger and pounding a Heineken. You know what I mean? It's such a relatable story, no matter what culture you're from, just sort of family and the dynamics of family with different family members and how you all view each other differently, and some people what they take as insults to what you took as a point of maybe pride or personal growth. And it's such a beautifully told little family dynamic story. At least myself, and I think you'll agree, and I think most people do, given the most critical reception and viewer reception, you find yourself sort of not only falling in love with most of the characters in this movie, if not all of them, but also being able to identify with most of them in a certain way too. And it's very sweetly told. It's very, just a really great coming of age growth story, but also just splices of just really gut-bustingly cute and funny scenes. It's so well done. It got me.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this when it came out originally, and I loved it then. It was one of my favorite movies of 2019. And yeah, rewatching it again, it still is like so incredible. And I think it's because I do agree that there's a sort of universality to at least a lot of the emotions you get out of just like, coming back to family, meeting back up with these people, having a different perspective, especially as like an adult, coming back to these people. But also, it is so inherently about like a Chinese American family going back to China and so many of the conflicts that happen from there. And yeah, you mentioned like some of the pronunciation thing. I'll just say one, the actress is Zhao Shuzhen, who plays Nene, who is great. I completely agree with that. And two, just a disclaimer, we're two white dudes, so we could easily get either pronunciations or things wrong, clearly. about the cultures, and we apologize in advance for that.
Yeah, that's not why I don't do it. That's literally not
Right.
Phonetically, I cannot put it together. I would sound like a moron.
Right, as opposed to me who sounds like a moron. but no, I just love with this movie that like it is still so inherently like specifically of this culture, where there's stuff like the scene where they're at the one restaurant that's like rotating the food around, and they're talking about the fact of like, oh yeah, well, we've been in America for so long, and it's like, oh, what about, well, when you go over to America, isn't it easier to get like money like it is here in China?
How long will it take you to become a millionaire in America? It's a long time. Really? Don't take that long here. You know,
right,
that's just...
and the conflicts, but just like, oh, I think you all are just forgetting about your Chinese heritage. It's like, but yeah, you're sending your young kid to college in America. It's like, oh, he'll come back. And all this other stuff like that. Assuredness of like, oh no, he'll stick to his cultural heritage even if he goes over. Like, I love how they're dealing with some of these like conflicting back and forth things that just give you a window into just like also a different culture, where it's just like they like there's an equivalent you might be able to find to that. The way this movie uses language, I love so much, because it's mostly in Mandarin. Like, there's I'd say 90% of the dialogue is in Mandarin, and there's a few points where they use English, but even then, the implementations of English are so perfect, like the scene where they go to the one, like the hot doctor that he's trying to set up Awkwafina with, but where she uses English, just like, look, you can tell me, like, is she actually, like, dire? Like, she's not gonna understand English. And, like, they're having the back and forth conversation that's, like, so brutal and horrible, and then it's just like, oh, they're gonna get, like, closer together.
Yeah, the grandmother Nene character is sitting there just smiling, like you're like, oh, finally she found somebody. And
right,
yeah, it's fucking great, dude. It's fucking great. One of my favorite scenes probably of the movie really is when she stumbles across her father and her uncle, you know, in the hotel sitting there smoking cigarettes and stuff.
Yes,
and just these two guys who are of similar age. I mean, obviously the uncle he says he's the older brother, but it's not by much. And just how much different their opinion is on what they should do, whether or not they should tell her. The father is so conflicted, where he's like, look, I have to go with what the family says. I'm sorry. You know, and then when the uncle explains it to her, and just this is what I mean by Awkwafina in this movie. It's so fucking amazing. Like, the uncle explains to her why we're doing this. We're taking on the burden of this disease so she doesn't have to. And we're taking on the burden of, you know, not telling her we'll be miserable so she doesn't have to. You know, as a family, that's what you do. And you can see the hurt in Awkwafina's face and eyes. I mean, they're just welling up. But you also get like, where she understands where he's coming from at the same time, and she starts to go with it.
Right, or even I love the other detail of like they're both smoking, and like particularly the father had said like he had quit smoking, and it's like, yeah, I quit, or I'm going to. Like, shut up. I'm in a stressful point. And like but then Awkwafina's reaction at the same time is very much like so relatable in terms of like, it's not like, how dare you do this? I can't believe you do this. It's like an actual human thing of just like, man, what the fuck are you doing? Like, there's an exasperation there. Just like, God.
Yeah, it's great. She's like, what are you doing? Don't give him any more cigarettes. He's like, hey, he's your father. Don't control him.
Right.
Right, where she's sort of being playful, but he's taking it in a completely different way because of, you know, how they were raised and things like that. And the uncle and her have another great scene, you know, one where he's telling her, you know, we can't tell her, and they're walking down the street, and she's just responding,
saying,
I know, like at least 10 times. But his speech at the wedding.
Oh, dude, right?
Bro.
Because like you mentioned, like he spends so much of the time trying to like be closed off and say like, no, we're not going to reveal all this, and he can't when he's just looking at his mom from that stage.
Oh,
like it's all just like crumbling apart.
And he breaks the fuck down. And I mean, it's so sad. You know, don't get me wrong. I cried at this movie. That's not the scene that got me, but that was a very sad moment.
Well, I think another great thing is like, to even that contrast with that, was like her, Billy is the name of Awkwafina's character. Her relationship with her mother is like a complete inverse of that, where so much of like their relationship, which Diana Lynn is the name of the woman who plays the mother.
At first I hated that character. Mm-hmm. At first you kind of hate the mother.
Right, because she's initially like, oh, hey, even before that, when they're in America still, and she's like, oh, wait, I should go over and see Nene if she's dying. It's like, no, you'll be too emotional and you'll reveal and you'll ruin the whole thing, like, if you go over there. And it's like, how dare you? And then the moment she comes over, the first thing is just like, how did you get the ticket for this trip? Did you, like, spend it on a credit card, probably? Of course, you can't afford this trip. Like, there's so much of, like, that stuff where it's like, oh, she seems so emotionally closed off and distant, and you can tell that hurts her to the point where it's the fucking scene where, like, the bride of the cousin is getting made up, and like all the women are in that one room, and fucking Awkwafina just breaks down about just like, one of the few happy things in my fucking childhood was hanging out with Nene. She was so great, and she was so emotionally supportive and so good, and you were constantly so distant when we moved to America. Just the three of us, I felt so alone.
And the story about the grandfather at the same moment.
Yes. Right.
Like, nobody told me. Nobody told me he was dying or he was sick, and then he was there, and then he disappeared. I never saw him again. And how much it hurt her and how much it affected her. And, the mom is sitting there, and you're right, that it's a great moment for the mother character, where she's sitting there sort of like, you could see it a little bit in her face here. She's regretful, but at the same time, she's kind of, I think, pissed that she's revealing all this in front of everybody. But it's at the moment in the car, which is such a great moment, where the mom is, turned away from her, but she's obviously crying because the mom explains why she doesn't show emotion and things like that.
Yeah, at the hotel, where it's just like, if you don't reveal like, oh, you're crying about everything, then like they think you hate your family, but you're trying to be strong at the same time. You're trying to be the strong person, because you see it, because like with the dad who's like kind of breaking apart, and Awkwafina, she has to kind of like feel like she has to be the rock in this relationship that keeps things together.
Right, and it's the scene, like I said, in the car, the cab ride at the sort of the climax of the film, where she's turned away, and Billy sees that her mom is upset and crying, and yet you could tell she wants to put her arm around her. You think she's going to, and she doesn't, because she knows her mom doesn't like being emotional and doesn't like getting involved in this stuff. So she doesn't want to draw attention to it, and she doesn't want to.
And she respects her wishes.
She respects her wishes, right? And it's such a great moment, but at the same time, like, oh God, I mean, I don't know that I couldn't like grab my mom and be like, don't cry, don't cry. Like, it's such a good moment.
It does such a great job, this whole movie, of like really painting all of these characters into such developed, beautiful people. Like, I love particularly all the stuff with Lu Hong, who plays Little Nene, and that's actually Lulu Wang's other grandmother.
And she's great.
Side of things. She's so phenomenal, especially the bit at the wedding where she's talking to the mother character about like, my husband's going to retire. I'm going to finally go visit him after, Nene does pass. And then we're going to travel the world like we always wanted to. Oh, you can come over to America and see us. Yeah, we'll take you around for sure. I'm going to do great. I'm going to do fine. And then Lulu Wang holds on her face. And you just see her kind of dissolve, because just like, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. Life can turn in so many different ways and make that plan completely fall apart in front of my fucking face. And that's such a beautiful, tragic moment that isn't like overtly tragic. It's not overly manipulating you like It Comes at Night with the tragedy that's there. It's all very human and earnest and earned.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's not a moment of this movie that I felt emotionally manipulated. And a lot of these type of movies, can do that. We're like, oh, that's a fucking cheap shot, and to get you crying or something. I didn't feel that in this movie at all. Like, I was 100% on the ride with the for the film and for the family, and really, like I said, fell in love with every character, even the ones, like I said, like the mom, I wasn't too positive on the beginning, but by the end, you're like, oh God, this poor woman, like what she's, how she's had to shut herself off emotionally and things like that. It's just, it's really something. I will say, the scene, might as well reveal it. The scene that got me is the right after, it's at the end basically, but after she's in the hotel room with Awkwafina and she gives her the money and stuff like that, the grandmother character, and then they're outside hugging and it's pure silence, and it's a good 30 seconds to a minute long of them just grasping each other. And then the line is, you have to go because I can't control it anymore. The grandmother says it to her. And then they drive off, and as the grandmother's standing there sort of waving at them, then the hand goes to the mouth. And you can tell she's bawling. And I was like, oh, fuck me. Like,
it's so beautiful, yeah.
It's great. I lost it. And then so I lose it. And I'm like, oh, fuck, dude. Oh, and I'm literally doing those where I'm going, oh, fuck me. Oh, fuck. And then I'm like, okay, I'm good. And then the credit video rolls.
Well, I want to put a pin in that because I want to discuss that near the end of this. But I do agree with you about like all of that stuff, particularly like the fact that she's like, oh no, I won't be able to control it if we stay around for too long. It's too many sad feelings here. I think that's the thing that works so well, is that all these people are inherently emotionally closed off to some degree. Like, even Awkwafina is painted as like, oh, you're the more overly emotional one, but she still really is like much. Right. She's much more stoic, but because she has like a bit more scenes where she's like cries or whatever, it's like, oh, whoa, Miss fucking Hanky over here. Look at you. Right.
I mean, it's not necessarily that she's even crying, because that doesn't happen a lot in this movie. It's scenes where she's just not pretending to be happy and like everything's okay. She's just being quiet and a little bit bummed out.
Right, and I love the fact that even like with the Nene character, despite how close they are, at the same time there are still those needling things that feel very realistic to like someone who means well, but at the same time is clearly like kind of insulting you in an unintentional way with like, oh, you can't act weird at the wedding. Just like you like don't be you, basically. It's just like, wow, kind of a dick move, but also you get it, like you get that like what she's trying to like mean for that, where it's just like, look, I want you to be happy. I love you so much. I would hope that you would like display that to me a bit more, and you can't just like be like so closed off with like your other family members that are there. And I love all the stuff at the wedding. The wedding is so fucking charming.
It's ridiculous.
At, like, it's at this like shitty pool hall looking place, and I love the whole thing with like crab, where it's like, oh, we were supposed to have lobster, but the crabs come out, which is so fun. And then all like the particular little thing when they're doing like the musical chair sort of game where they're going around each other is like so wonderful. It's so cute.
How is getting fucked up.
Yep. He's great. He's also like he's more of like the blubbering mess of the family if anything. She's like, oh, he's so sensitive. And like at the end when he's like, well, so we can't have a group full where the groom is crying. We can't.
I mean, he loses it.
He really does.
I mean, Jesus. But yeah, it's great. You got the one singing opera. You got Billy and her dad doing karaoke.
Oh yeah, the Killing Me Softly. So
yeah, Killing Me Softly. Great. You got the dance, like the two girls doing like an 80s hip hop dance.
Yes.
I mean, it's, those things, those banquet halls that they're in. I mean, I've never been to China, but I've worked in banquet halls that are like that. And it's very accurate to where all the staff just doesn't give a fuck.
Like the one chef who comes up just like, I was just told we'd make crab.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, dude. The guy, the one sitting there, they're playing the drums and doing it, and then as soon as it's over, they just pack their shit up and go sit outside and smoke cigarettes.
Oh yeah, I love that too. Like the shot where all of them are dancing outside. Like there's the one server who's just like on her phone, the other one's like smoking a cigarette in the Chinese dragon costume. Like half of it's off.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Like
and that's
so
100%. That's so accurate. I used to work at a banquet hall in Florida called the Palace Grand, and I will tell you right now, every person who works at the banquet hall, from the wait staff to the chef to any of the kitchen crew, because I was like a sous chef, we don't care about how this is your special day. We didn't care about how happy you guys were and how beautiful we made everything for you and how much you liked the food. We want to go the fuck home. And that was so accurate. I was almost laughing too loud. Like I almost woke my wife up. I was laughing so hard. So I'm like, yep, been there. That's 100% real.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing is what I love also about just the way that even Lulu Wang shoots this movie. Like it looks beautiful, but at the same time, there is this sort of like gray filter of sorts over everything just to display not necessarily like it's just overly depressing, but it's like there's something hanging over this whole movie, even visually.
Yes.
Just that whole factor of like Nene's like diagnosis is just hanging on these people. And it just colored the whole movie to a certain degree, where even in the middle of this like happy scenario of like, oh, we're having a big wedding, there is still like a bit of gray, just to intimate the fact that like, oh, we're still lying about something, we're keeping something in emotionally, and we think it's the right thing, but is it really the right thing? So many of those questions there, and even just the way that like she shoots some of them, like the one place they go to where like they're fitting the bride for her gown. I love how so much of the scenes between Awkwafina and Nene are shot from like the back. Like there's that one beautiful looking tree display that they're like, when we see them talking, it's from like behind, and there's like we see the interior and how it's just like, oh, it's like styrofoam and packaging and all this other bullshit. It's like behind, like there's so much of like, oh, any of this facade that we have, so much of it is portrayed as like, oh, we're looking at the other side of it and what we're just kind of like hiding ultimately. At the same time, even visually, it presents that beautifully.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Another scene that I thought was very funny, but I think it's very poignant too, is them at the grandfather's grave, where they're all, no, you have to peel the orange. How the hell is he going to eat it if you don't peel it? No, he quit smoking. He never quit smoking. Yes, he did about 2 weeks before he died. No, he told you that he never quit. Who cares? He's dead. Let him have a cigarette. They're eating the cookies and they're putting down the steamed buns and all. And then the constant bowing. And you're like, oh my God, I'm getting nauseous from bowing.
Right. And they keep saying just like, what else? Like the names, like, who else do we praise here.
Even to the point
Bless.
where her sister is like, let me win a lot of money on mahjong. Like, okay, all right, yep. Like, it's so good. It's so well done.
And that's the thing, like this movie is so deft at balancing the humor with a lot of that drama that's there at the same time in a way that feels like you are at a like family gathering. Where like you love these people and you haven't seen them in a while, and you're like, oh, you remember a lot of the good times, but also, oh yeah, you're an adult now, as like an Awkwafina is. So you're like 30, and you realize like, oh yeah, these are all people with like really shitty hangups as well that I have to kind of realize. Like they're not these figures I remember from when I was a little kid. Or even when like she meets like her younger cousin who's like the little kid, and it's like, oh, I remember when you were super little. Like I'm not little anymore. I just love like there's so many like real emotional things, and I'm curious at him with that kind of balance of drama and comedy. You mentioned Awkwafina being so spectacular here, and we've seen her in other things, like obviously like in Shang-Chi and some of these other stuff. Like the biggest trouble for me with this movie in terms of like Awkwafina's career is like she's so good here, and then I've seen her like I'm worried she's going to be overexposed in a similar way to say, like, unfortunately, this happens a lot with, like, people of color who are, like, kind of famous for being comedic, like, sort of side characters get super overexposed in America, especially in comedies. Like, I think of, there's a similar thing with, like, Tiffany Haddish, where I think the two of them are just being, like, really front-loaded, like, oh, we're going to have you voice a character here, and then be a supporting character in this movie or on this show, and all this other stuff, and it feels like they might be overexposed to a degree that might, unfortunately, affect or harm their careers for a bit. How do you feel that like Awkwafina can kind of learn from this and kind of take it into the rest of her career?
Search out these type of roles. See, not necessarily, ones that center around her being a person of color, which is great though if she does, because you need more movies like that. But take more small, independent sort of work. Let yourself get cast as the lead in sort of dramas, or even something with comedy to it. Like this does have a fair amount of comedy. Unfortunately, she was involved in that controversy. I don't know. I mean, 6 months to a year ago, or whatever, where she was accused of sort of appropriating Black culture.
Oh, right.
It's a big long thing. I don't want to really get into it.
We're not the ones to speak on it.
No, but it seems like it might have dwindled and died down. I hope it didn't hurt her career, but I also hope that she sort of does more movies like this, smaller pieces, character pieces. I don't necessarily want to see Awkwafina that we saw in Shang-Chi in everything. I don't want that.
Right.
Or Awkwafina that we saw in Ocean's 8 or whatever it was. We've got that. We've seen it. It's fine. Awkwafina in The Farewell has unlimited potential to really do some great dramatic acting, or even just smaller comedy acting. Not enough, doesn't have to be big and boisterous and quirky and weird. Like she's so good in this to where be hard pressed if someone didn't know who she was and sort of followed her, knew what her career was as sort of a YouTube sort of rapper / talk show host / whatever. I honestly think you'd be hard pressed if you showed this movie to someone if they would think that she's been doing it for years. I mean, she's so fucking good at this. Your heart breaks with her in this movie.
Yeah, because like I don't mind her necessarily taking on something like this, or like she has the Comedy Central show and some other things like that, where she does like some of her more comedic stuff, and she can be fun in that. I just hope she doesn't take too many of those on, and she kind of has, like I mentioned, like Tiffany Haddish had that problem where she was just like so overtly overexposed, and people unfortunately got sick of her despite how talented she is. But then she ended up kind of bouncing back a bit with like the card counter. If anything, I want to see Awkwafina do something like that. Like something just like real, like where she has like a bit of like that humor that you mentioned. She's kind of like a bit more of a comedic relief to that very dark movie with Tiffany Haddish in the card counter.
That is a very dark movie.
Right. She kind of, you're just like, oh, thank God, Tiffany. Oh, you're gonna be a couple laughs here. But she's also a really great, well-developed character that's not at all just like the Tiffany Haddish persona. I hope at the same time that Awkwafina can take on like kind of do one for me, one for. I agree. The big comedy paycheck kind of roles. I hope she can.
I agree.
That.
Me too.
Let's go ahead and get into our final thoughts here. Adam, your final thoughts on The Farewell.
Like I said, I think it's a beautiful movie. I think it's pretty much expertly crafted, acted, shot. The story is. It's beautiful. It hits you in all the emotions. And, something we put a pin in earlier, but I mentioned there was another scene that sort of, I'd stopped crying and then it got me right back into it. At the end, right after sort of the main film ends, you get a video of an older Chinese woman doing this sort of the Kia power noises that the Nene does in the movie. She's in there, doing the noises and thrusting her hands out. And then you get the text that that's the actual woman that it's based on, and she's still alive 6 years later.
Right, Lulu Wang's actual Nene.
Yeah, actual Nene is still alive even after the diagnosis. She's still going strong.
6 years.
And 6 years after she was given months. And I was instantly like, oh, fuck, no. Like here it is. And it's just such a beautiful moment to end the movie on, to where, these people at the end of the movie are like, oh, my God, they just said their final goodbyes. And you feel so bad for them. And then it's like, oh, wait, no, they didn't. Oh, good. It's such a sweet moment. And like I said, I think this movie, if anything, if you want to call it anything, is sweet.
Yeah, and to speak on that thing too, I know some people, some reacted a bit different. They were just like, oh, that feels like kind of cheapens some of the stuff that happened earlier. I really don't agree with that. I think it does a really great job of it shows that this movie's all about look, life takes certain turns that are really upsetting or unfortunate, and it can be kind of dour, but it's like this movie where so much you can either have a really fun moment with your family and then an awful moment that kind of makes you sober up a bit happens. That's what this is. It's just it's a thing of oh, Nene could have died after this point, but life takes a different turn where she's still going strong.
I don't understand the logic behind that cheapens everything they went through. No, it doesn't.
No, I mean, that cheapens at least the ending bit where it's oh, they're saying their goodbyes or whatever.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. But I'm saying it doesn't, though. Because at that moment in time, they thought that was the end.
Right.
What the fuck? Nobody could see into the fucking future. Nobody knows. At that moment in time, it was very real. That was the end that was it for them. That was the last time they were going to see her.
Right, the emotions are what matter in that moment as opposed to
1,000%.
Right, how it happened right after. Yeah, it's very emotionally honest and true, which is describes the whole movie perfectly, pretty much. Yeah, and I mean I agree with everything you said. I think it's still a phenomenal movie. I think it's a great way of making a culture, for us, two white guys. It makes a sort of culture we're unfamiliar with so much more relatable, but also at the same time very distinctive. It doesn't hide any of the cultural elements that are there. At the same time, there's so many things where it's oh, I can relate to a moment like this, or I feel like I have more of an understanding of a culture I wasn't as aware of at the same time. I think it does a great job balancing those two elements, and definitely put Lulu Wang as somebody where it's I want to see you do way more stuff, whatever the fuck you have. It's kind of like you had with Barry Jenkins with Moonlight, where it's just more of you, please keep making stuff. You're great. I want to see way more of whatever the hell you're doing, and hopefully A24 can continue to support her doing such a thing. And also just an interesting tidbit to even add on to that element of the ending thing where Nene was, alive at the end. Nene, the actual real Nene, found out about her diagnosis from this movie's release.
Oh boy.
She was apparently talking to her sister and found out, because she had at least recorded that bit and had been aware throughout production about oh yeah, it was going to be based on real events and kind of be about her relationship with her family, but then finding out oh yeah, that's what you hid. But at the same time, the movie is well aware that oh no, this is a thing, because they establish at a certain point oh, what, you don't think Nene is aware of this? She did the same thing with her grandmother, and even your grandfather, she did the same thing too. She didn't tell him until the very end. So it's it's a thing where oh, she wasn't aware of her diagnosis, but it's part of this cultural thing at the same time. So it's well, I can imagine the conversation with Nene going how dare you hide that from me? It's motherfucker, we did this before. Now it's just on you.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's insane to me. Wow. What a way to break it, or her to find out.
I made a major motion picture starring Awkwafina.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Oh, jeez.
Well, that's the discussion for our two movies, but we still have our recurring segment to talk about, the double redo. Double redo.
Double redo. Double redo. Double redo. Double redo. Double redo.
That works. So the double redo is a segment that Adam and I do every week where we, along with talking about the two features we select for the episode, we each bring in a good and a bad feature to either recommend and then not recommend to all of you, all based on the topic, in this case being, of course, A24. So Adam, you have a good pick and a bad pick
I do.
to talk about.
I do.
Go ahead.
So for my good pick, I have one that's been sort of mentioned on the episode already a couple times. It's the movie that really got me into A24. It's the movie that got me into their brand of horror, whatever intellectual horror, whatever the fucking stupid term is. I still love it. I still think it's an expertly crafted film. It made me a fan of this director. To this day, I love this guy, even though I haven't seen his newest movie yet, which, fuck. But I have The Witch with Anna Taylor-Joy. Talk about a movie that is filled with sort of dread and suspense and tension throughout. I mean, it's this movie. This movie is so fucking not only beautiful to look at because of the way it's shot with the natural lighting, but the acting and just sort of this movie gave us Anya Taylor-Joy really, and she's one of those up-and-comers who's just a phenom, and it's scary as fuck. The Black Phillip reveal is amazing. The ending is fucking great, and the implications of what it is terrifying. I just think The Witch is, as far as in that genre of, subgenre of horror, if you want to call it that, with sort of like Midsommar and Hereditary and all those other ones, I still think The Witch is the best one. I think it's absolutely a perfect film. Then my bad one, it's one I just recently seen. It's with Oscar Isaac and Taylor Kitsch. It's Mojave, named after the desert. And it's briefs another up-and-coming film director, takes off to the desert, meets a fucking stranger who ends up being like a stalker killer, and they go through this whole fucking cat and mouse situation. It's just pretentious garbage. Listen to every interview that Hulk Hogan did in the 80s where he says brother. Add those together, multiply it by 10, and you have how many times Oscar Isaac and Taylor Kitsch call each other brother in this movie. It is so bad that I'm telling you, if you were to make a drinking game out of it, you would be dead 20 minutes in. The dialogue is just nonsensical crap. Oscar Isaac has probably the worst fake accent ever. Taylor Kitsch is just wooden. He's a piece of drywall. It's fucking lousy, dude. It so wants to be this psychological thriller that all it comes across is just a movie that you want to talk about is filled with unlikable people. This movie has it in fucking spades. Everybody sucks in this movie. You hate this movie. The one thing I'll give it, it's got one of the only times Mark Wahlberg's died in a movie. It doesn't happen often. It does in this. I'll tell you what, he's a fun little cameo in it. Walton Goggins has a fun little cameo in it. There's some pretty cool actors in this movie. It's just, like I said, it comes off just this pretentious, weird mess.
Yeah, I haven't seen Mojave, though. I am looking at the Wikipedia entry, and I will say, I guess Taylor Kitsch was so bad in it that you forgot he was Garrett Hedlund.
Jesus Christ. Those guys, they're the same fucking guy.
I mean, look, they do look similar. I'm not gonna deny that.
And they're both terrible.
Garrett Hedlund's been good in a couple things.
Like
Kitsch really,
what?
like Inside Llewellyn Davis, and there's a couple other things.
Oh,
like,
yeah, he's all right.
Yeah, I think he's been
whatever.
serviceable in smaller
Handsome
things.
white dude with scruffy facial hair and long hair.
Right, that's true. If you put him and like Aaron Taylor Johnson, it would be one of those like, which is the one that I shoot?
Exactly,
I don't
1,000%. 1,000%. The Taylor Kitsch stand behind him. Hey, I was in John Carter, man. And you'd be like, fuck, what am I doing? Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't seen that particular movie. And then The Witch, obviously, I have seen. I saw it in the theater, and then I saw it again fairly recently as part of like a pre-Northman viewing. Because we'd recently done The Lighthouse. I was like, I haven't seen this movie in a while. And yeah, that movie still is pretty fucking great. And I agree, Anya Taylor-Joy is so phenomenal. That was like her first big movie. But also, Ralph Ineson as her dad, and then Kate Dickie as the mom are also so.
Oh yeah. Don't you want Ralph Ineson to be like a voice actor after that? Like that dude's voice.
He's got the perfect voice. Yeah, and even like the little kids who play like the other like siblings are so good. Like those two twins are like so perfectly annoying as just little assholes. But yeah, that movie's so stellar. I think that's a great example of like the elevated horror thing, which we referenced a lot in the It Comes at Night thing. But that was based on like a Guardian review that was talking about that sort of trend. And I agree that there's like at least a kind of trend with like those kind of horror movies that are a bit less like super spooky horror driven. But the elevated horror term I think is a really bad one, just that kind of puts immediate bad faith on any of those movies where it's like, oh, we're above horror, we're not actually horror films. It's like, no, they're actual horror films. they have a different style and aesthetic, but they're still horror movies necessarily. I just argue that like something like The Witch isn't like looking down at horror. If anything, is doing a great job of like doing a version of folk horror that's a bit more modern, but at the same time has like certain spooky things that are like so integral to the genre. If anything, that's the problem with It Comes at Night, is it kind of puts like, it more tests that kind of bad faith argument. It's like, oh no, that's way more of what this is. It kind of looks down at horror and it's just like, no, we're different than that, even though you're not. Fuck you, dude. But it's time for me to do my choices here. And I'll go ahead and with my good one, I have a movie that was so criminally underrated, even though I got a Best Original Screenplay nomination at the Oscars the year it came out. I have 20th Century Women, which is basically this movie directed by Mike Mills that takes place in 1979, and is about a young boy who is being raised by a single mother played by Annette Bening. And Annette Bening's a bit conflicted about like, well, you know, I don't have a father figure in his life. His father left when he was a lot younger. So now I want to have at least some help raising him, because I don't know if I'm not doing the best job. She enlists the help of the person who is subletting a room in their house, played by Greta Gerwig, who's kind of like a bit older. She's like in her, you know, mid to late 20s. And then also the young woman who is like best friends with the son character played by Elle Fanning, to basically kind of take on certain parenting responsibilities that Annette Bening feels like she can't do. And it's this kind of slice of life movie about all these characters interacting with each other in 1979. And I think it's a beautiful movie about kind of generational conflicts, because Mike Mills does such a great job with that movie of having these characters both be in the moment, but also have narration to display like them thinking distantly. Like the Annette Bening character constantly talks about like, you know, oh, I'm just, you know, I'm a person of a different time. Like she tries to go to a punk show with Greta Gerwig and she's like, oh, it's not for me. I don't know if this is really working for me. But even during that punk show, there's narration of Annette Bening saying like, it's 1979 and in 20 years, I'll die from the lung cancer that is affecting me from these cigarettes. And I'll miss out on Y2K, miss out on all this other stuff. In my life, I'll never meet my grandkids, stuff like that. It has such a beautiful thing where it almost feels like these characters are Dr. Manhattan at the same time that they're actual, like, just living beings that are, like, around each other. I think it's such a beautiful movie that has a lot of, like, really funny, personal, intimate moments with these characters, but also does such a great job of sprawling out, like, what like the timeline is basically of like how they have these various different generational conflicts. All the performers are so great. Like Greta Gerwig is so stellar before she became a director and did her own great stuff with like Lady Bird and Little Women. But Elle Fanning is still phenomenal here. The young kid who plays the actual son is pretty great. He hasn't done a lot since this, but I think he works really well. Billy Crudup has a supporting role that's really fun. But Annette Bening, I think, gives the performance her fucking career in this movie. It is such a stellar, wonderful performance. It's really funny, but really sad. So many beautiful moments that you just feel like, fuck, I want you to be my mom. You're so fucking great. She's such a great character. Really love that movie. I think very criminally underrated. And I think Mike Mills is a really great director from like this and Come On, Come On are two of my favorite movies from A24 in the last few years. And I think this one deserves a lot more attention, though. And then the other one I have, the bad one, is also from Trey Edward Schultz. It is his most recent film, Waves, which is basically about this family that lives in suburbia. They're an all-black family, which is interesting given Trey Edward Schultz is a white guy, kind of trying to talk about a black family who feels like they have to kind of live up. Has to kind of like live up to the standards of like, oh, we're in the suburban environment and we feel like we have to like, there's more expectation on us and all this other stuff. And it's so conflicting to me because the main character that we follow most for like the first half or so, even a bit more, like the first 2/3 of the movie, is played by Kelvin Harrison Jr., who was in Comes at Night, and is one of the most like both unlikable but also uninteresting protagonists I've ever had to follow in one of these A24 movies, where he's constantly like an asshole to his girlfriend, an asshole to his entire family, treats everybody like shit, is so awful, and basically feels way more like an asshole suburban white teenager written by a white guy and played by a black actor, and it feels like so awful and grating, and it has like so many like sort of lifetimey twists and turns that happen with these characters that I really fucking hate so much. And then the perspective shifts over to a different character. I won't spoil how that happens or who that person is, but I'll say it gets to be at least a bit more interesting at that point, because that character we're following, it's sort of like them dealing with the fallout of the first half of the movie, and them kind of trying to rebuild after a certain point from like a lot of the horrible stuff that happened in the first half of the movie. And that movie is kind of interesting, has some good performances from like Taylor Russell, who you might know from the Escape Room movies. I think she's a very underrated up-and-coming actress. I think she's quite good. As Lucas Hedges pops up, and he's fun in a lot of these A24 movies. Fucking Sterling K. Brown is, as per usual, great in this fucking movie. He's so stellar. But man, it's one of those movies where like it feels like after so much of the bullshit we dealt with, I don't know if this other half that's kind of enjoyable is worth it at all. It's too little too fucking late. And I think it's part of why I said I think Trey Edward Schultz has become like the guy who does these A24 movies, and it feels like it's sort of like him on autopilot. It doesn't feel nearly as sincere as a lot of these other people. And Waves is a great example of that. I think it's slightly better than It Comes at Night, but not by a lot. Still is one of the worst of the A24 movies for me.
I have not seen either of your movies. I do remember there being buzz about 20th Century Women, especially the Annette Bening of it all. I mean, that's something if I can catch it, I'll definitely check it out. I mean, I'll watch pretty much anything A24 puts out, except for Waves. I don't think I'll be watching that one. I got to be honest, even the trailer for it, I was like, what is this? Like, I don't understand. And then, you know, I'm watching, I'm like, okay, it's about the plight of sort of, you know, African-American family in, you know, modern day suburbia. Okay, cool. Wait, who wrote and directed this? So I'm like, like, oh no. I'm avoiding that one just on principle alone. Like, I don't think I'll ever watch it.
It especially comes off weird when the first movie he did, Krisha, which I kind of mentioned earlier, that's his best movie. It's kind of interesting, but the thing about that movie is it stars his entire family, his very white family, and Trey is like one of the main characters in the movie. So to come off from that, and then 2 movies later, like, no, I want to talk about the black experience. Like, Trey, shut the fuck up.
Buddy, it'd be like me making a movie like, you know what I want to talk about? How bad Hispanic women have it. Like, I have no fucking idea. Like, I have no clue. Like, I wouldn't know what the fuck I'm doing. And I'm guessing Trey Edward Schultz has no idea what the fuck he's talking about. That is just, what are you doing, man? What the fuck are you doing? Mm-hmm. It's just, you know, you almost feel like it's a shame Sterling K. Brown even took the part. Because he's great. But then,
look, I feel bad for all the black actors in that movie having to take those parts.
They have to. They didn't have to.
Well, especially Sterling K. Brown really didn't need to. It's like, you got this as us, man.
Yeah, dude, you're great. You know, just fucking, you're awesome, dude. You made me cry watching Black Panther. So, you know, you kind of got carte blanche to do whatever you want.
Did the Predator hurt you that much? But I don't think it would have hurt you that much.
I hope not. Jesus. But, yeah, I have no fucking interest in that movie. In fact, to the point to where I will honestly say, like, you know, whatever we said about It Comes at Night aside, everything I've kind of heard about Trey Edward Schultz, and then even the idea of that film, it makes me go, I'm never going to watch a Trey Edward Schultz movie again.
Wow. Well, let's go ahead and repeat our choices for this, Adam.
I had, for my good, The Witch, and for my bad, I had Mojave, starring Taylor Kitsch.
For my good, I had 20th Century Women, and my bad, I had Waves. Well, we want to thank all of you for listening, and stay tuned for the end of the episode where we're going to be doing our picking for next time. But before that, we have to do some housekeeping, like some thanks for people that help us with the show, like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thor Lally for the artwork. I'll follow him at Night of Water. That's Night with a K, _of_water. For so much of his great artwork on Twitter. You can find a link tree to all his stuff. And thanks also to our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/DETVpod, where for just $1 a month, you all get to listen to bonus audio podcasts we put out, and vote in polls to pick movies that we cover and topics that we cover for an episode, including the particular week this episode is going to be released. You all get to vote in a poll for our upcoming topic in June. You know, it's the summertime, so we figured let's do something related to summer camps, and you all get to pick between us covering summer camp comedies and summer camp horror films. So we could go either the meatballs route, or we could go the Friday the 13th route. Whichever way we go.
Just to let you know, though, if the horror gets picked, we're not going Friday the 13th. We've talked to death about that shit.
I mean, we did one episode.
That's enough. That's enough.
I mean, there's other ones. There's sleepaway camps. There's a few others we could talk about. But you all get to decide if we go on the comedy or horror side of things. You all get to vote. And we really appreciate the dollar and the votes. It really helps us out.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Especially not you, Rafe Telsh. Consistency.
No, I appreciate your dollar, Rafe. Please keep giving us a dollar. I really appreciate it.
I mean, you know what? I appreciate the dollar, Rafe. I just don't appreciate you.
Of course. And for more of our antics, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod. And also, you can email us with your thoughts and your double redo choices even over at doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at NotTheWho'sTommy, where I have my own musings. I also do some writing at both marianithomas.wordpress.com and at film-cred.com.
And you can find me on Instagram at atom_adam. That's ATOM_OR_ADAM. You can find me on Letterboxd at Schwanson. That's SCHWANDTSON. And if you really want to touch base, find me on Facebook under my name. And just mention you listen to the show, and I'll add you, and I will indeed have a conversation with you.
To hear our audio conversations, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get podcasts out there. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, why not listen to all the other great shows on the network? And if you like what you're hearing here, you can dig into the archives in our Podbean main feed for the several episodes we did even before we joined Talk Film Society. And if nothing else, if you can't support us on the Patreon, it's totally cool. Money can be tight, but you can be supporting us completely for free by rating, reviewing, or simply sharing the show around, because that gets us more visibility.
Yeah, please do, guys. We've been doing this now for over 4 years. We'd love to do it. We love having even one person listen. But if that one person shares, then that might bring on a second person, and so on and so forth. We don't want to, be the biggest thing out there. I mean, if that happens, great. But we definitely like doing it. We definitely like you guys enjoying it. So help us out, fuckers.
Right, because then if you share it to a second person, then it's 2 whole people. Then why not 4? And if 4 whole people, why not more?
You lost me. You lost me at multiplication.
Oh, that's true, yes.
Yeah.
You see, A is equal to B squared, and thus that means we get more listeners on the show for Flyhaven.
I just want people to listen to me talking to my phone.
Of course. But now, Adam, we gotta do our picking for next week's episode, now that we're finally at the end of everything here. And next week, we're going from the little indies of A24 to a big, blockbuster, star-driven vehicle of an episode where we are talking about, finally, someone who we've wanted to devote an episode to, I think, since around the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
Was weirdly the last time that guy released a movie, Tom Cruise, was Mission Impossible Fallout. That's the longest gap we've ever had without a Tom Cruise movie.
Oh, is it really? Oh, wow. Yeah. I guess it would be.
Yeah, 4 years, because that dude is such a superstar that he at least made a movie every 2 to 3 years. He never really stopped that much. But yeah, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to tie this into Top Gun Maverick until now, which I'm more curious about just as a Tom Cruise movie than I am as a Top Gun sequel, because I'm not a huge Top Gun guy.
I do not care about the Top Gun sequel at all, because I am also never been a Top Gun guy.
But Adam, that trailer though, there's a lot of fun.
No, I don't care. No, I don't care. The funniest thing about that trailer is Miles Teller's mustache.
And we've been seeing it for 5 years since they first put out that fucking trailer.
Now I'm just convinced now it's going to be weird to see him without it.
I just love also I can still remember the first time I went back to the theaters was in May of 2021, And the
And they had
cup
the
they
promo
gave
cups.
me
Yeah.
was what for June of 2020.
Yeah, buddy.
And I loved, like, around that same time, I went to the movies with, like, a friend who was just like, oh, man, did Top Gun come out? It's like, dude, that was 2020. No movie came out.
Guy at the bar I managed came in wearing a Top Gun Maverick hat. And it said 2020 underneath the logo. And I'm like, oh, well.
That's a collector's item at this
That's
point. Keep
right.
that.
100%.
But yeah, we're going to finally talk about Tom Cruise, who, if nothing else, there's so much fascinating stuff to that career. So worthy of an episode. And I can't wait to talk about it with, I have the 2 good choices. You have the 2 bad choices. We've each assigned number between 1 and 10 for our choices. And the other person will pick, a number, and that gets us close to our good and our bad choice. But keep in mind, there's a certain thing we have here called the Godfather rule, where since the anniversary episode, just last episode, we were given a single veto that we have in our back pocket to use, and we have to use it before next anniversary. So we have a whole year now to have this veto that's burning a hole in our back pockets used. And if one of us hears a choice after picking between 1 and 10, and we're like, you know what, I don't want to cover that particular choice, we'll say, actually, I'll take the cannoli, unless that gets us the alternate choice, the other one. We have to go with no matter what. And that veto is used. So, for example, this happened previously, where Adam used his veto when I had the choice of Cinderella, the 2021 musical, and that led us to covering Me, You, Madness on our 2021 wrap-up episode. And then you had the same thing where you had 16 Blocks as a choice that I ended up picking, and I decided to veto that unless we got 12 Monkeys to cover as the good choice for our Bruce Willis episode.
Correct.
Yes. So, that's on the table here with your 2 bad choices and my 2 good choices. So please, Adam, for my good ones, a number between 1 and 10.
I'll go number 3.
At a number 2, I have a movie from a director we've covered recently on the show, but I definitely would say this is my favorite movie of his, and a movie I love. Probably Tom Cruise's best performance, along with some other people in the cast. I have Michael Mann's Collateral.
Fuck yeah. I love that movie.
Yeah.
Great movie.
On the other side of things, over at number 9, I had another one of, I think, his better, especially like blockbuster movies of recent that wasn't a Mission Impossible film. I have Edge of Tomorrow.
Another great fucking movie. I love that movie.
Yeah.
That might be my favorite Bill Paxton ever.
Oh, God, he's so good in that movie.
He's so good. Tip of my spear. Crack of my ass.
Yeah. So we have the good ones settled, but now, Adam.
Good choice.
I'm so incredibly curious about your bad choices. I'm going to go, on the opposite end of things, I'm going to go number 8.
All right. At number 10, I have a movie that is, I know it made a lot of money. I know it's part of one of the sort of top earning franchises of all time, but I also think it's one of the worst sequels, especially in this franchise. I have Mission Impossible 2.
Oh boy, we're going to be talking some Impossible. I'm not going to take the cannoli on that, because at the same time I do agree, I think it's the worst of those movies. That movie is still fascinating.
It's fascinating.
So many levels.
Yeah. And then for my alternate choice at number 1, I had Cocktail, which is one of his earlier movies. It's a terrible film.
Cocktail's just a movie I've pretty much heard about, because it's like, when I heard the premise, like, oh, they're like bartenders who make cocktails.
Pretty
I'm
much.
like, why do I care about this?
Yeah,
That's
pretty
so
much.
interesting to me.
Yeah. It's terrible.
All right. But Mission Impossible 2 and Collateral.
Nice.
That'll be a very interesting discussion for next time. But until then, everybody. Oh no, I got black gunk coming out of me again. It's happening again. Ugh. Oh, Adam, do we have to end the episode now?
Nah, dude. We're about to start recording.
Oh no!